Hi, everybody. Hopefully you're able to enjoy lunch. I just want to get started on our last session today, which is about liver health advocacy. So what we'll be talking about today is becoming an effective health advocate, a little bit more about Heather's story, and she'll be sharing lots of tips and tricks. So just to go over it, what we're going to be talking about, so I'll do a quick intro of Heather. She'll present, and then we'll have a short Q&A at the end of today's session as well. So our speaker today is Heather Badnock. Heather believes in the power of not-for-profits and the strength that they have to affect change for people, animals, and our environment. As a communication strategist at Village PR, she advises health, disability, community, and environmental clients. An active volunteer with the transplant community, Heather mentors people on the path to becoming living liver donors and volunteers with the Canadian Donation and Transplant Research Program and the UHN Centre for Living Organ Donation Advisory Council. She also helps people on the transplant list find living donors by running their public appeals pro bono. And a quote from her is, "The best decision I ever made was donating 22% of my liver to a stranger, to a child I've never met." So Heather, take it away. Let me just cue up your presentation here for you.
Thanks.
Your clicker is
All right, so
there.
just because I don't know, it's just that easy, eh?
Yeah, just that easy.
Done. Apparently, I can stand between here and the outside chair. And if I go outside, just throw things at me because I'm a wanderer. So it can't go out there, right? Don't tell me what to do. All right. So hey, I'm Heather. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm a communication strategist. I've been working in communications for nonprofits for 25 years. And then I'm also this person. I'm also a non-directed living liver donor. So 6 years ago, I donated 22% of my liver to a stranger. We've never met. We don't know who each other is. However, the kind folks at UHN have a couple of times let me know that my little recipient, although they might not be little anymore, is alive and well. So, just so to start, we're going to talk about advocacy, and we're going to talk about advocacy through the media, and I'm going to try to make it I'm just going to break it down because I think it's much simpler and more accessible than many people think. So, how many folks here have done a media interview ever? A prolific letter to the editor writer right there. Yes, Belgium does a great job. Has anybody ever contacted a journalist with a story idea? Something that was bugging you, something you were enthusiastic about? Yeah, great. Does anybody want to share how it went? How did it go for you? Were you happy with how the story came out? You were not. Tell us.
I'm trying to think, there's a couple of things. One,
Can everyone hear Blythe?
don't,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you get up.
that's okay, fine.
Thank you, Stephen. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces, by the way, because some of us are like, well, this is our first time meeting in person. We used to be next door neighbors. We've known each other for years, like unrelated actually to liver. So it's very cool to see.
Yes. I'm trying to think. One was there's a reporter looking to do a story on, I think, people who are immunocompromised and wanting to get access to the COVID vaccine, sort of initially.
Yeah.
Anyway, had a conversation with this journalist, and I found the story that came out of it didn't represent sort of what I had said accurately. Or I just felt that they kind of didn't get some key information about me correct. And so, but I was like, okay, well, it's good enough. It's whatever. But it just kind of left a little bit of it. It's like, oh, I could have done a better job telling my story directly rather than reading it afterwards and being a little bit disappointed.
And so did they get facts wrong?
Yeah.
Oh, that's super disappointing.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. That shouldn't happen.
I know.
Yeah.
But I just didn't have the energy to I was like, no big deal, whatever, I'll leave it. But normally I would.
Did they get the
I wasn't feeling well enough to to deal with it.
immunocompromised bit?
Yeah.
Did they capture in the story, did you feel like what it's like to be immunocompromised and also seeking the vaccine and seeking that protection and living in a pandemic?
Yes, I'd say they got the bigger picture, but some of the more
got
details
lost.
about me got lost. Yeah.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Sorry to hear
But
that.
and so I was like, next time I will submit an opinion piece with my story.
Right. Talk to Delja.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to share? I know Jennifer does an excellent interview. You're one of my examples of a good story. Heads up. Anybody else? No, I think I can go back there. Okay, so we're going to walk through some tips, and I want to demystify this whole newsroom journalist thing and how we go about it. I'm going to tell you a little story first. This is maybe a story that you've seen, especially if you're in Alberta. So in January, a woman whose name we will see posted in a transplant discussion group, Canadian Transplant Association, and she shared that because in Alberta and because there's an anesthesiologist shortage, they were, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit quick thing about how kidney transplant works. So people who need kidneys, so if you need a liver transplant, you need a blood match. Paired exchanges are pretty rare in the liver world. But in the kidney world, if you can have a living donor for your transplant, you don't actually have to find someone who's a match to you, because Canadian Blood Services does something called kidney paired donation. So they enter all of the potential recipients, like all of the patients, and all of the potential donors into this database, and 3 times a year or 4 times a year run the algorithm, and it makes matches. And it's this really beautiful cross-Canada thing that happens. So this anesthesiologist shortage led to kidney patients in Alberta being told, yeah, we're actually not going to put you in the upcoming matching process. So we're actually just going to pull Alberta patients out of the algorithm. You're not going to get a chance at a donor that you desperately need. So she posts this in a group. And I said, this sounds like a big deal. She said, yeah, it is. And so we got to talking. Her name is public now. She was in the Globe and Mail. So I said, I think this sounds like a story. So are you okay if I cross out your name and maybe just send it to some journalists and see what happens? Because this is the advocacy piece, right? We're like, what the heck is going on? She says, yeah, absolutely, go ahead. So I emailed Andre. I start at the top, eh? So I thought I'd try Andre Picard first, Globe and Mail, national health columnist. Just sent him a quick message, guys. This is not a super formal thing. This wasn't a press release. This was just hey, Andre, here's the deal. And in case you're not familiar with kidney paired donation, here's an explanation of kidney paired donation in 4 lines. And I attached, with the patient's permission, screenshots. So he forwarded the message to a reporter in Alberta. So he never responded to me, and that's okay. But he sent the message on. And Carrie gets in touch, and she's like, hi, I'm super interested. I had said to Andre, I am not sharing the story with anybody else. I have sent this right now to you and to you alone. So Carrie writes back, I'm super interested. And she says, keep this under your hat. We want to have the exclusive. Great, we have an agreement. No problem. If the Globe and Mail wants to take it, I don't need to send it to anybody else. So a few days later, in the Globe and Mail, story about it. And 9 days after that, Alberta partially reverses its decision. The partial reversal helped those people who have the hardest time to find donors. So they're called highly sensitized patients. And so Kelly got back into the algorithm for that matching process. I don't think she actually got a match, but at least she had a chance, right? So this is an example of advocacy. It went from a discussion in a transplant group to a couple of screenshots to consent to I'm just going to send this off and see what happens. And they were like, yeah, this is totally a story, right? Okay. But I swear that anyone can do this, even if you don't know Andre Picard. Okay, so we're gonna talk about a few things. Just a little snippet about how the newsroom works, and then thinking about our purpose. Okay, my limit's here. Okay, got it. And then themes that make good media stories, right? So how to spot, like I did in that Facebook conversation, this has the ingredients. So this could be a good story that might be interesting for a journalist. How to pitch, because pitching is this big word, but it's really just like, hey, Andre, or hey, whomever, right? Here's this idea. And then how to think about preparing yourself as a patient, thinking about your personal emotional safety and comfort level, any boundaries that you might have, right? So we're gonna talk about this and a few more things. So just to say, I know some folks know more about this than others, so I realize that some things I'm gonna say are gonna be familiar to more experienced folks, maybe other folks it's gonna be brand new. And then we can either save questions for the end of each section or save questions for the end of the presentation. Given that I know the schedule is running a bit behind, I'm going to suggest saving to the end of the presentation. And then I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm not on a schedule. Okay, so first and foremost, journalists work super, super hard, like insanely hard. They have more pressures now than they have ever had. And so it used to be like maybe you would just write and file a story. Now you've got to write and file a story, and maybe you're expected to tweet about it, and maybe you need to have made some video about it. Like the pressures are so heavy. Can I go this far? Okay, some of them have to come up with story ideas every single day, and no one's actually giving them story ideas. So if you call them up or you get in touch with their newsroom to say, this thing's really bugging me, I think this thing with the system is not okay, I'm gonna tell you my personal story as a reflection of like what's going on in the system. They might take it and run with it because they have a story to file that day. When we say media, there is a ton of media, right? So we've got owned, right? So if you're an organization, you own some media, you own your own social media channels, you own your own newsletter, you control that completely, right? Word for word. We've got paid. So if we actually want to control every single word that runs, we can pay for an advertorial, we can pay for digital ads, we can pay for all sorts of stuff. We've got our social media, our other shared, like organically shared things. Today, I'm going to talk about earned media. So the notion that you earn it, right? You have the idea, you call up the journalist, you call up the newsroom, and you sell them on your story. I learned this week, I think I knew that this existed, I just didn't know what it cost. I learned this week what it costs to pay CTV Morning Live to be on the show. $8,000. Yeah, I knew stuff like this existed because once for a client, I paid a dietitian to say certain things on a morning show. So like I knew that this like existed, but yeah, I was blown away. But you don't need to pay. If you have the good idea, then you just call them up. Okay, so let's talk about, we have to have a point to this, right? We don't just call up a journalist to vent because we have an issue. We need to have a point, right? What's the point? So with the kidney story, the point was, and I actually don't know if I said this out loud, but I just want to make really clear. I hope the Alberta government thinks twice before ever messing with the kidney community or the transplant community ever again. I don't want them messing with anybody, to be clear. I want everybody to get the healthcare that they need. But I want them to remember that there are advocates for the kidney community and the transplant community and not to mess with us. That's my takeaway. I want them to be like, oh, no, not the kidney people. Don't do that. Okay. I hear a lot in my profession about raising awareness, and it's a term that I despise. It is the most meaningless expression on the planet. I just don't care. Okay, so I'm aware of cancer. Well, what do you want me to do about it? Give me an action. Give me something to do, right? So it just means that people have heard of it, and that's a starting point. People have to have heard of liver disease or cancer or mental health or bed bugs or whatever the issue is, right, to do anything. But it's only a starting point. May I say that awareness is absolutely not a result, and in any communication strategy I've ever built in 25 years, it is absolutely never the goal. And then there's some sort of contact, right? So people see the topic on the news, they sign up for an email, they like something on social media, but this is contact, this is not a result. And again, in my career, I don't measure likes and follows. Those are pretty vanity metrics. They're still not a result. These are results, right? And so it's a result of communicating. There are actual things that we are aiming for. And as someone who does a ton of advocacy through the media, I'm driven by this sort of thing, right? So more research dollars in liver disease, right? Show me the money. Some sort of policy or legislation change, right? Like we got for the kidney folks in Alberta who they will never mess with again. Or more people apply to be living liver donors. This is a lot of what I work on, right? For fun, just for fun, I come up with like living donor stories and pitch them. So there's some ingredients that it takes to have a really solid pitch. So if you want to get a journalist's attention, a newsroom's attention, a producer's attention, you're looking for some of these ingredients. You don't have to have all of them. Don't pressure yourself to have all 6. But is it a new story? Is it a unique story that hasn't been told before? How is this relevant? Is it linked to a current issue in some way, right? If you're pitching to a local reporter, hopefully it's a local story. If you're pitching to a national reporter, it's hopefully got national interest, right? Or it's just a really big local story that they're going to report on nationally, like Kelly and her kidney. Newsrooms, before they put anything on, are asking the question, so what? Why do our listeners, why do our viewers care about this, right? So not that it's just interesting to us, but that the viewers out there are going to tune in, they're going to read, right? They're going to be engaged with it. Impending deadline. A person on the transplant list is facing an impending deadline. So you can easily put a pitch around that. Or in Kelly's case, right, getting pulled out of the kidney matching program for that cycle, she is on an impending deadline, right? Or maybe your program is losing funding, right? If you don't get new funding by a certain time. So that could be a pitch, right? Conflict is a dicey one, but sometimes that makes a good pitch. You sometimes see conflict in the news around, say, media and management. So a couple of examples. So maybe there's new national data that shows the rates of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease are increasing rapidly, and you're living with the disease, right? So there's this new data, you're a personal example, and you want to talk about it so that people, and what's the outcome? Change their eating behaviors, know the symptoms to look for, know when to call their doctor, right? Not awareness, never awareness. But some sort of call to action, or more funding, whatever the case may be. Or maybe there's like, in the liver community, we're probably aware that this happened, right? But there were changes to the 6-month abstinence rule to get a transplant, and they were replaced based on scientific evidence, a pilot project that happened in Ontario with the Trillium Gift of Life and UHN. So, and we're going to talk about that example. Or maybe you're just launching a really unique new liver program, and you are the organization pitching the story, and you ask a patient to be the example of someone who might really benefit from this program. I'm sorry, Mo, this is not the best screenshot. Mo is an amazing human being who got a transplant as a child. Jennifer is also part of this interview. It was a very, very strong interview, and let me tell you why. They shared some really interesting statistics. So in only 10 years, NAFLD had increased from 1 in 10 to 1 in 4. This is significant. Also, really helpful tidbit, being more active, eating a well-balanced, healthy diet, especially in children, can help prevent issues. So you're giving us a way to make healthy choices, a way to potentially avoid having NAFLD, right? And here's the call to action. Petition's been started in the hopes of getting education ministers on board. It was such a great piece, Jennifer. It was so well done. Yeah? Who pitched it? You like checked all the boxes. Like it was perfection. And Mo's a great example. Mo's a great speaker. We've never met in person, but we do follow each other. Okay, national issue plus personal example, right? This was a tough one. So Deborah Selkirk lost her husband. He did not qualify for transplant under the 6-month abstinence rule. He had abstained from alcohol, but didn't live long enough to make it to 6 months. And she constitutionally challenged the rules in 2017. Interestingly, Trillium actually conceded that 6-month rule was arbitrary. It has just been like it was a made-up thing that someone chose at some point that stuck. You've got to be abstinent from alcohol for 6 months to get on the transplant list. But international evidence, we knew, had been showing that isn't actually supported, right? Just because you've been abstinent for 6 months doesn't mean that you're going to remain abstinent, right? She won. So I couldn't find the exact date, but it was around the year 2000. So she got a pilot project to happen. She had to put her personal worst thing that had ever happened to her in her life out there to make this happen, right? The 6-month rule was replaced by policies that make sense and that are based on evidence. So just to be clear, the 6-month rule wasn't just like thrown out and replaced with nothing. There's brand new guidelines that make a ton of sense. But that's why this was a story, and there were many stories about this. This one's close to my heart. So I volunteered to help people on the transplant list to run their public appeals to find living donors. Okay, I'm emotional about this one. Okay, so we have been trying to find a donor for Rolly since October 2022. And he's a lovely man, has lovely children. We've done social media posts. We've done any number of things that we always do with a campaign to try to find someone a donor. I, for my work, was running a press conference at the Ottawa Food Bank 4 weeks ago. And all the journalists had left. We had good coverage. All the journalists had left, and just Caitlin from CTV was left. And I was chatting with some of the staff, and we all had name badges on. I looked over at one of the staff, and his last name is Hupe, like Hupe. And that's Rolly's last name. So I was like, do you know Rolly? And he's like, yeah, Rolly's my dad. And it's like, bing, 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 right? You're like, all the pitching criteria, right? And I was like, okay, hold. Run over to Caitlin, who's still there from CTV. And I was like, okay, I want to forget about, I love the food bank. Just forget about the food bank for a second. I'm going to tell you a totally other story, and then you tell me what you think. So I tell her about Rolly, and I'm like, Nick, his son, is right here. He desperately needs a liver donor. She calls the newsroom, and they say, yeah, go for it. So she wraps up her food bank piece, and then we go into a room, and she interviews Nick. And then the next day goes and interviews Rolly and Anne-Marie, his wife, and it was on CTV. And then because they're in the same building and they work collaboratively, it was also on CFRA. So after more than a year of trying to find Rolly a donor, UHN has said, and this is music, you don't need to keep pushing the appeal. We have enough people in the pipeline. So hang on, Rolly, because we hope it's coming.
That's cool they actually say that.
They actually do. So for patient privacy, for donor privacy, UHN cannot tell you, for good reason, right? They can't tell you how many people have applied. They can't tell you the names of anybody who's applied. They can't tell you who's in screening, nothing like that. But they can tell you, keep pushing or don't keep pushing. And it's only maybe the 3rd time we've had a don't keep pushing. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. We found that out on Rolly's birthday. Yeah. Okay, so we think this is coming. I have not seen Today's Citizen yet, but, okay, so what can I just say? Random opportunity. Just random, saw it, went for it. Because why the heck not? And if it didn't work out, it didn't work out. But it did work out. Okay, so also just about spotting the random opportunity. Was on a phone call with Louise Schwartz a month or so ago, just about volunteering at a transplant thing. And we got to chatting. I'd never met Louise before. And I says, like, so what's your connection to transplant? And she says, oh, I'm a non-directed, sorry, does everyone know what non-directed is? Quick story. Most living donors direct their donation to someone. They direct to a brother, sister, family member, dad, colleague, etc., right? They choose someone and they direct their donation to that person. A non-directed donor signs up, doesn't have someone that they know on the transplant list, and leaves it to the transplant team to choose the person who needs it the most. It's a very cool experience. That's what I did. It was like the most joyful, awesome, incredible thing. So that's how I don't know who I gave to, right? And it was the most joyful thing ever. Okay, so Louise says, oh, I was the first non-directed kidney donor in Ottawa. So I said, so did you have to like persuade the Ottawa hospital to let you do it? She said, yeah, it took 1.5 years to persuade them because they hadn't done that yet, right? And there are many countries in the world where you still can't do it, right? They think it's unethical. If you ever see, if you ever know like Dr. Nazia Selzner or anyone else from UHN, when they do transplants on non-directed donation, they actually have a bullet line that says that we're not sociopaths. Like I have the screenshot, this is current. So they have to somehow explain to the international community that we're not sociopaths. This is what's happening internationally. So turned out she was the first in Ottawa. She was like the system changer, right? Many years ago, I met the first non-directed liver donor, and he changed the Toronto system. I think it took him 2.5 years. Kevin Gosling, who, yes, is Ryan Gosling's uncle. So just because I'd spoken with both of them and I kind of knew them both, I just thought, well, what the heck? I'll just get in touch with Elizabeth Payne. She's the health reporter here in Ottawa, and just see if she'd be interested in writing about 2 system changers. And it was framing it that way, right? They're system changers. Anyway, it's supposed to be in today's paper. I haven't seen it, but it's nice and long. So I have seen it, but I haven't seen it in the paper. Okay, but anybody could have done that. Anybody can connect the dots and then just call a newsroom and go, are you interested in this? Like, would this be okay? So you want to give journalists what they need, right? Blythe, I'm happy to send you the slide deck.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
I'm happy to just share the PDF. So the journalists need some things, right? And I call this chew it for them, right? Just like a mama bird, because again, they're bananas busy and they have to file stories every day. So I want to hand them the whole story on a platter, right? So remember that we told Andre, like it was only being shared with him, right? So get the news out first and quickly. They want an expert to interview. They need you to be very clear and accurate about what the story is. They need patient stories to humanize it, right? Jennifer does this fabulous interview, and Mo illustrates the story, right? And visuals. So if you're trying to pitch a story for TV, you have to have visuals, right? Less so for radio or newspaper. Okay. So here's the thing. So say you've got an idea, it's something that you want to pitch. It's the lack of mental health support in chronic disease, for example, right? So write out your story, 3 to 5 sentences. Don't do some big formal press release. There's no need for this. There's a time and a place for that, but this isn't it. 3 to 5 sentences. What's the story idea? And then you need someone to pitch it to. You need someone to call. So I checked just before I came on to see, like Elizabeth Payne is the local Ottawa Citizen health reporter. And so I just Googled to see if I could get her email address. It is right there on the Ottawa Citizen website. But also the Ottawa Citizen newsroom, the CBC newsroom, the Globe and Mail, everybody has a general form that you can fill out. They have general phone numbers. You can call the CTV newsroom and you probably reach the assignment desk and you just tell them your idea. Call in the morning. It's a little bananas at the end of the day. They're on deadline. They're preparing the newscast, all of that. Morning calls are good. Some journalists make their email addresses visible on their X profile. So I know the dumpster fire that we all know it is, but some of us are still there. So sometimes you can see their email addresses on there. And you just email or phone the newsroom and just tell them your 3 to 4 sentences, what you're thinking, what your story idea is. Here's an example. One day I just texted Colton at CTV. So I just texted, guys. This is not a big formal, like I want to show you how insanely easy this is. And I just said, it's super cold today. I'm headed off to volunteer at a veterinary clinic for the pets of people who are homeless. I feel like the cold, homeless pets is maybe a thing. What do you think? And he goes, yeah, I'm not working today, but I'll pass it along to Hannah. She's producing. And they showed up. Just a random try. Doesn't always work out, but why the heck not, right? But that's how easy it could be. Sometimes they don't get back to you. It happens. I have sent ideas to Andre and he has not responded. That's okay. Dude is busy. It happens all the time. We don't take it personally. We don't bombard them. I'm not the PR person who's going to phone you 17 times. If you don't respond, I might follow up once. And that's it, right? I respect your decision that maybe it wasn't for you and it wasn't for today. But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a social media post. Maybe if you're a volunteer with the Liver Foundation, you can suggest the story for their newsletter, right? There are so many other places that you could go with this great idea that you have, even if the media don't pick it up that day. Okay, so having gone all through it, like did any of this spark ideas in your brain where you thought, oh yeah, I kind of do have, I see Delja nodding.
I have ideas all the time.
I know you do. You have good ideas.
And like my only medium is to write to the editor about how I feel about different stories over the years. But I haven't written my op-ed yet.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for one of these days.
And your specialty, as far as I've ever seen it, is responding to a story that has run.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could also do the reversed. You could also do like, I have this idea that you haven't written about that I think you should. And I'm not putting anybody on the spot, I won't call out any names except that I know Daljit. So,
Oh yeah, like I heard one thing when I went to see a patient, like a friend of ours who was a patient at the general,
yeah,
and I saw this lady picking up recycled plastic bottles and stuff like that. And I didn't even take a photo of her. But I thought that was a very good gesture compared to people throwing all the plastic bottles and all the garbage up along the way going to the
I love that.
hospital.
Yeah.
And I complimented her as I said, you're saving the earth from the pollution, by picking up all the plastic bottles. She told me she loves to do it, that's why she's there.
Has she been doing it for a long time?
Yeah, well, I don't know if she does it all the time, but I just spotted her once when I visited somebody in the hospital.
You never
So-
know.
But I
That
couldn't
little
pick it
nugget,
up- I couldn't pick up that story because I thought of it after that I should have taken a photo or taken her particulars
Yeah.
to follow her up.
that little nugget might have been like a story that was beautiful recognition for her.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great example. That's wonderful. All right, percolate on it. Percolate. Or maybe you have these really good ideas that you're keeping to yourself.
To add to that, as a child, in the 60s, we used to have commercials on TV and on the radio saying, do not litter, don't be a litter bug and stuff like that. And everybody was picking up their own garbage and disposing of it properly. But nowadays, even driving here, parking, and you can see cigarette butts and you
Yeah.
see plastic containers and all kinds of, papers and,
Yeah, it's
Garbage.
disappointing.
and we need to have that be of age again, all these commercials.
Makes me think about, had that woman's story run, that it might have inspired people to stop littering. Just by modeling that wonderful behavior. Blythe, I see your hand
Missed
is
the
up.
opportunity.
It's okay. But now it's, you won't miss it again.
Yeah, it's ringing in my head.
Sorry. Blythe.
Yeah, so one of the presentations we had was from Dr. Mohit Kahar, who's at CHIO, and he mentioned that unlike breast cancer or some other diseases, there is no national sort of liver strategy. I can't remember what he said exactly, but there wasn't some sort of national coordinated thing, and that to me was like, why not? How?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he said there is for breast cancer, there is for whatever, but there
Yeah.
isn't some sort of, I don't know what he was saying, like body or whatever. So it made me think, why not? Or how did those others become national? Which then, because he said it's more fragmented, it's more.
Right.
Do you mean about like transplants and things like that?
It was in his presentation. I can't remember what he said. It was quite detailed points, but he said there was.
Guidelines and national strategy.
Yeah. And so that to me was like, if there isn't, how did these other groups get one? And could that be something that could be brought attention to? This is then leading to challenges.
Well, and then what's the implication of being a national, federal strategy? Is it easier to get funding? Is there something attached to that? Is
He was
there?
talking about marginalized groups being like struggling to get certain supports
Huh.
around like liver stuff too.
Has he pitched this?
I don't know, but it just made me think, hey.
Dear Andre, or Brian Goldman, right? Always start at the top, because you never know,
Yeah.
and then work your way. That absolutely feels like an interesting story. Yeah, 100%. So if you see him, tell him. Okay, so also things can work the other way. So maybe you pitch something yourself, but maybe the media contacted you, right? And so why the heck did that happen? So maybe you've met before, right? Maybe you were previously interviewed about a topic and you did a great job. And so the media, they never throw out a name or a phone number, you know that, right? So if you've spoken to them once and they have your number, you are in that database and they might call you again. Maybe the Canadian Liver Foundation was doing a really fantastic story about NAFLD and they needed someone to participate, so and your name is Mo, and they called you and you're the patient example, right? That can happen as well, you get asked. Or, right, the kidney Globe and Mail story, she posted something on social media, and then, I mean, it was in a closed group, so a journalist couldn't have seen it, but I grabbed it and went with it. But it also happens where organization posts something on social media and journalists go, oh, that's interesting. That's a story. And so then they get in touch with that organization to learn more, which is, my goodness, the easiest way to pitch, right? Like if you know enough journalists are following you, forget the press release. You just put up a social media post and wait for it to happen. Or a journalist wants to cover something, they don't know where to start, they Google away, and you turn up. So there's any number of reasons why the media might get in touch with you. When that happens, there are some standard questions that you can ask. So whether you're contacted directly by a journalist or a producer, or whether the Liver Foundation invites you to participate in something, there are some things that you want to know before you go ahead, right? So what's the outlet? What's the deadline? Often it's today. That would be a super normal thing. But maybe it's today by 3. Is this a long lead where they're just preparing and it's going to be in a couple of weeks? What's the length? Is it live? Am I going to be recorded? Because there's a big difference. What prompted the story? What angle are you coming at this from? Who else are you talking to? And then what's the best way to reach you? So when a journalist calls you, if you're sort of feeling, in the moment like, okay, wow, this is big. I need to think about this for a second. Just say to them, like, take all the information down and say, I'm going to get back to you in 5 minutes. I need a moment. Or you can say somebody's on the other line. You can say whatever you want. But then, you can take a minute and get back to them. And I want you to think about caring for yourself in the meantime, okay? So this is like a good time to reflect on, okay, they've asked me to share my story. Do I want to share my story, right? Do I feel today like I'm in that place where I want to and I'm comfortable, right? Maybe I've shared it before and that was a different time and I'm just not feeling myself right now. Is it traumatic, right? Your sad story doesn't have to be entertainment for someone else if you don't want it to be, right? And so think about if it's going to be traumatic for you to talk about, how have you previously felt after sharing your story? Did you feel good and strong and like you helped someone recognize, symptoms or risks, or you helped other people get help? Because if you felt strong and great, then maybe we carry this forward, right? But your safety and your comfort is more important than any interview you could ever do. So a healthy boundary is always, it's okay to say no. It's, so as much as I'm talking up like the media and everything else, it just for this moment, let's just also acknowledge it's okay not to do it, right? Maybe someone else can do it. That's okay. Also, informed consent, right? So when you're thinking about whether or not you're going to do this interview, you're going to think, this interview could be seen by anyone, anywhere. And once it's online, it's probably not going to be taken down. And they are going to use your full name. Anonymity is rarely granted. It's granted in conditions where there's like a safety concern. Sharing health information, not a safety concern. So I see full name here, okay? And think about how this will impact you. Will sharing this story, depending on what it includes or doesn't include, is this going to impact future things about your life? If you're applying for jobs, do you want an employer to know this about you or not know this about you, right? This is your private health information. And maybe you're totally cool with it, and maybe it's not a thing that you really want to talk about. So I'll tell you a quick story. I have no idea how I'm doing for time, by the way. I'll tell you a quick story. This is not a story that I worked on, just to be clear, because I am insanely protective of the people that I work with. And this would never happen if I was on the job. But 2 reporters thought it'd be a good idea to do something called Check Day. And they wanted to go out to a location where they know that people buy drugs on the street and talk about how the volume of purchases and using goes up when people get their checks. And they interviewed people who I am going to say were absolutely not able to give informed consent in that moment. They were using, and they could not think through the consequences of participating in this interview. Sure enough, someone's landlord saw the story and they lost their house. They lost their housing. Their landlord kicked them out. And they did not have protection. So it's a really, really unfortunate situation.
Talk about your lack of ethics.
Also that, it did not.
Won that.
Yeah, it did not happen with an organization that I was working with. But when that same journalist came to an organization I was working with on the same topic, we actually said no for years. Yeah, and I told them very clearly why. Because they had done wrong. They really had, and we needed them to know that. Yeah, we're good now, but they've learned. Just to say that it's okay to set boundaries, and it really wasn't okay. We actually have, that organization now has very, very clear guidelines about approaching people on that property, people using substances, informed consent. You had better come through us, because if you try to approach someone and you haven't come through us, we're just not going to work with you anymore, right? And it sounds harsh, but not really, because a person can't give informed consent in that moment, right? And so there's ethics. Yeah. Okay. Also, think about power dynamics, right? In a healthcare setting, if your healthcare provider asks you a question, of course you answer it. But just because a journalist asks you a question does not mean you have to answer it, right? It's okay to say in advance of an interview or during a taped interview, I appreciate why you asked that. It's actually not something I want to get into. That's okay, right? It feels sometimes in that situation that the journalist has more power than you, but I want you to know how much power you have. The words don't need to come out of your mouth if you don't want them to, right? So if you feel amazing sharing your story and you, I love talking about being a living donor. It's like the thing I talk about all the time. You can barely get into a conversation. If you met me for 5 minutes, you know that I was a living donor. Because I want to normalize the heck out of it, and I want other people to think about doing it. And the number of people who have told me, well, Heather, you just made it seem like such a normal thing. So my friend needs a liver or whatever, so I'm just going to do it, right? It's yes, every time, right? Or some random person on Twitter will be like, I'm thinking about it and I saw you tweet about it. So can I just call you? And I'm like, yes, every single time, yes, right? So I love talking about it. But if you don't, then don't, right? And you can always tell journalists, hey, I'm totally happy to talk about all of this, but there's like a piece of this that I'm not comfortable with. So if we could just not go here, I'm happy to go here. And they go, okay. And they respect that. They 100% respect that. All right, so what are you gonna say, right? So say you're doing an interview and you're planning ahead. If you're an organizational representative, if you're Jennifer, if you're someone from an organization, you've got key messages, your organization stands for something, there are messages that you want to get across. If you're a patient speaking about your story, you're telling a story. It's not necessarily about like trying to get these key messages across. At the same time, there are some points that you probably want to make. When I'm talking about being a living liver donor, I want you to know that it starts regrowing on day 2. It's full function by day 10. It's full volume by 5 or 6 weeks. I want you to know how fast my recovery was, that life goes back to normal, right? So there are some things that I always want to get in there. But am I like being key messaged by Toronto General? No, I'm telling a patient story. And so knowing that there are things that you want to get across, and knowing that often as you're telling a story about your experience, for many of us, right, our healthcare journey is long and complicated. And I mean, you mentioned how long ago your healthcare journey started, right? You couldn't possibly, in a 7-minute radio interview, get all of that across. But there may be some points along the way that stand out or that are pertinent to the story you're trying to get across on that day. And so you would talk about those. So thinking that there's not always time to share our entire journey, think about that elevator speech. So if you had 30 seconds with the federal minister who could change everything, what would you want them to know? In 30 seconds in an elevator, right? And our key, we call them key messages, key relevant points. I put the word relevant there for a reason, right? Because if you're trying to get across a particular point, we're going to try to get those points in there proactively. We're not going to do that politician thing where they ask you a question and you say something totally different, but we do what's called a pivot. So if you know the key messages that you want to get in there, they're going to ask you something, and of course you're going to answer it, but then you're going to be like, but also the broader context or some key statistics, or right, and you're going to go over to the thing that you really want to say. We call that a pivot. If you get interviewed numerous times in a day, say the story is hot and you get requests from 4 different media outlets, 5 different media outlets. A thing I see happen is my client will use their key messages on the first 2 interviews, and then they're bored of the key messages. So then they start saying other things. And so we have to have a little discussion about these are different media outlets. These are different audiences, and I know that we're bored of the key messages, but you're reaching different people every time, so we're going to say the key messages every time, right? We think about that. And we talk in a language that our target audience is going to understand. So our target audience is actually not the media. The media is never our target audience. They're a channel. We talk through them to reach our target audience, right? And just make notes ahead of time. Sit down. Plan how you want to tell your story. Think about the points that relate. So if you've been invited by the Liver Foundation because we're talking about NAFLD, then you're going to tell those parts of your health journey that are related to that, and maybe the change that we need to see, right? Or the pieces of information that people need to know so that they can do the best things possible for their own health where possible. And just be super plain language. Sometimes you can have a conversation with someone and you're talking really plain language, right? I'm going to say this is the part of my story that's really important. And then you put a mic in front of them and they go, well, the intermediary story here is that overnight, they start using this jargon and this language, the leading edge research. Just talk. We're not trying to impress anybody. We just want to be understood. And again, we're not trying to impress the journalist, right? Because we're speaking through them to reach the people that we want to reach. And so what's the words and languages that those folks use? I cannot say enough about this free tool. HemingwayApp.com. You copy and paste text and paste, so copy your text, put it in that website, and it'll tell you the reading grade level. Just like that. Is it post-secondary? Is it grade 6? It's never grade 6 to start. We can get it to grade 6. It's the best possible tool. What I love to do is copy, so I paste the text into Hemingway, and then, so say it comes up like, I don't know, grade 13. I often start at grade 13. And I'll edit within Hemingway, which is basically just shortened sentences and shortened words. So like you break up a long sentence into 3 individual sentences, that often does it, until I get it down to the grade that I want, and then I copy and paste it back into my document. Super easy, free. I think there's a paid version, but I have never needed it. And if you're telling your story, so think about Kelly, the kidney patient who told her story. She also connected the journalist with experts, right? And so you don't just have someone's opinion and lived experience, as important as it is, but you also get that expert as part of the story. So for Rolly's story, so graciously, I called Dr. Nazia Selzner, I emailed Dr. Nazia Selzner, and I was like, so this story just came together at the food bank. Oh my gosh, it is happening. She's like, I've got time. And she did a CTV interview in support of Rolly's story, which was very gracious. But it helps because you have that expert voice, right? She's the medical director of the Living Liver Donor Program. She's the big poobah. Okay, how am I doing for time?
It's about 2 o'clock right now. We have to be out of here by about 2:30.
Okay, I'm almost done. Cool. So when you're actually doing the interview, just remember your relevant points and try as best you can to stick to those. And I know that as patients, my gosh, let me tell you about this detail and this nurse and the food. But the relevant points are, starts regrowing on day 2. I recovered really quickly. I'm joyful about it, right? Get those things in. Any interview I've ever done, you will see those things. Also, you go into the interview knowing the points that you want to make. And I say this to my clients, patients, etc. You've got them all front of mind. I've got to say these 3 things over the next 7 minutes of this live radio interview. So the host asks you the first question, and you pile all of your messages into your first answer. Happens all the time. You can hear it happening. You will hear it now when you listen to interviews. You don't need to do that. Trust in the host. They know what they're doing. So they ask you the first question, you give your first answer, and then stop. Let them ask you the next question, right? They're so good at what they do. So don't try to cram all of your answers into your first, don't try to cram all of your messages into your first answer. Think about the fact that you're on the record. So if they ask you something, typically if you're a patient, they're asking you about your patient experience. So typically something like this doesn't happen. It's more likely to happen if you're doing an interview about liver and policy or funding or something. And it totally happens. Sometimes they ask you a question and you're like, I don't know. And it happens innocently, right? Our scope of what we know is this, and we can speak in depth about what's in this box, but they ask you something over there, and you just don't know the answer. That's okay. Don't speculate. Just find a way to sidestep it. And if you're speaking on behalf of, say, the Canadian Liver Foundation because they've asked you to, then as much as possible say Canadian Liver Foundation, Canadian Liver Foundation, Canadian Liver Foundation, and not CLF. Sometimes you get asked the same question twice. So the interview opened with a question, you answered it, and then there's a few more questions, and then they ask you the same thing again. And you think, what are they, dumb? Like, I've already answered that. No, it's a gift, because your answer probably wasn't awesome, right? So sometimes the first question that we answer, we're still getting the nerves out, or we're just getting into the feel of it. We're not used to being on live radio. And so when they ask it again, just, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do this again because maybe my first answer was not awesome. And we don't do that thing where it's like, well, again, or like I said the first time. We just answer it again. It's okay. I think it's a gift, actually, because somehow we didn't convey what we needed to the first time, right? So getting a second chance at it, I think is like, I much appreciate that. Also, can I say I feel the same way about being asked contentious questions. So if we're talking about the 6-month abstinence rule, say, for example, super contentious, may I say, amongst transplant professionals in many cases, amongst patients, right? That person didn't follow the rules, they don't deserve their transplant. Like it is, I have seen some fights about this. So, and not that I would ever be asked about the rule, but pretend we were. And what if, what if they asked a really contentious question, like, well, do they really deserve to be on the transplant list? I would be glad to be asked that because it gives me an opportunity to diffuse misinformation, right? So I'm not mad about being asked something that's uncomfortable, or I'm not upset about being asked something that's like a rumor out there. I'd rather be asked so I can diffuse it and give people the facts, right? Yeah, again, I think it's a gift. So quickly, we've got a couple slides left. If you're doing a TV interview, so I'm going to take you specifically through a couple of interview types. A TV interview, rarely live, rarely. It's likely taped. They probably come to you. You're going to look at, so the camera's going to be like right there. You're going to look at the host, not the camera. The great thing about a taped interview is if you give an answer that you don't love, you can just say, oh, that wasn't great. Can I do that again? And they'll go, yeah, just go again. It's fine, totally fine. So you get a number of takes until you get it the way that you want. And then they're going to edit it, and they're going to keep about 7 seconds of what you said, which goes to the importance of having your relevant key messages, right? What are the points that you really wanted to make, that you really wanted to come through? If you're mic'd before the interview, so I got mic'd 5 minutes, 10 minutes before coming on, I specifically asked if it was a hot mic, right? Because how many times have we seen these funny videos where a person doesn't realize that their mic is on and then something gets captured? I mean, not that I was saying anything that I shouldn't, but hot mics happen all the time. So just ask. Radio might be live, it might be taped. In Ottawa, often live. So CBC, CFRA, City News, yeah, those are live. Taped, if you're so uncomfortable, you can ask sometimes, CBC only as far as I know, to do taped. They have a slot, I forget what time it is, just specifically reserved for taping interviews, and they will air it as though you did it live, but it'll be taped. So if you have someone that's really uncomfortable or just really nervous, then you can ask. When you're doing radio, listen for those cues that your host is trying to interject, and we all hear them, right? So when we're listening to live radio and the guest has been asked a question and then they're answering and they're answering and they're answering and they're answering, and you start to hear the host go like an intake of breath, or just like like clear their throat, or like they're trying to cue you that they're trying to get in. So we listen for those cues. We've made notes ahead of time because we're trying to remember our like relevant key points, but we don't want to read from those. So we put them in our brains. We know what they are. It's our own patient story. So we actually do know this cold, right? And we sound so different when we read. So set them aside and just have a conversation. What I might do for myself, I'm gonna stop doing that. The thing I might do for myself is write down just like one word, like recovery time, starts regrowing. I don't have to write down joy. I'm always gonna say joy. Or it's statistics. If there's a statistic I can never remember, I have to put that number down. Video interviews. I don't know about you, but I'm coming up on 50. I don't want anybody to be looking at my chin. So you can guarantee that I have like put a soup pot upside down and put my laptop on top or whatever, but like I want that angle, not that angle. And then we want the bright light in front of us. We want to face a window if we can. We don't want the bright light behind us. Make sense? Can I just say that a soup pot is just about the right height, or a bunch of books, but you really want to get it at eye level. So after your interview, the journalist is they're gonna write, they're gonna edit, they're gonna select which quotes to use, and they're gonna prepare their story. You do not get to see or approve the story. In my career, 25 years or so, I have only twice been sent like full stories to review, start to finish. Now, one of them was 3 days ago, but like I'll probably never happen again. So you don't get to see or approve it. They might fact check something with you. Did you say this? Did you say that? How old are you again? Where did you go to school? And expect, say you talk to a newspaper journalist for, could be 20 minutes. Expect to see 3 lines maybe. It's unless the story is specifically about you, and then you're going to see lots. But if it's a story about NAFLD and you're the patient example, you might get a couple lines, and that's totally normal. So you tell all your friends, I'm going to be on TV, I'm going to be on TV, watch City News. And then they tune in and your face goes boop, and then it's gone. But just know that that's normal. We ask for a correction, and I mean, we talked about this in the beginning, right? If there's a mistake, we ask for a correction. Sometimes they tell the story differently than we would tell the story, right? So as patients, we have probably told our story a bazillion times. We kind of tell it a particular way. I certainly have a particular way that I tell my story. And then I hear, I see someone else, write it out or, put it in a media story, and I think, that's not how I tell it. It is correct. It's just not how I say it, but okay, right? So that takes a little getting used to. But we don't control every word. And so we have to accept sometimes that people are going to tell our story differently than we would tell it, which is different than like outright mistakes, which you experienced. Okay, this is the best correction on the planet ever. I don't even know where to begin with this correction. So it's a style article about Guantanamo. Like where do we even, right? This is the correction that was heard around the world, and I'll tell you why. It's my favorite ever. So this Navy captain, Robert Durand, it was a piece about him and Guantanamo, and they described him as thick-set, and he took offense. And so he required a correction, this correction, and he wanted to be described as muscular instead. And so many media outlets picked this up, the correction story. Yeah, so I hope he's happy, because now we all know that he's really vain in a style article about Guantanamo. Okay, so here's what we covered. I'm just kind of curious to know who feels better equipped to call a newsroom or email a journalist with a story idea. Who feels better equipped? Cool, oh, I love this. And if you got invited to do an interview, who feels like, okay, I got a sense of how this is gonna go and like what's gonna happen and what questions I should ask? Who feels like, yes, okay, great. I hope that many folks go out and pitch stories about a wonderful woman picking up trash, or mental health supports in chronic disease, or whatever you feel like is super, super important. And I don't know if we're out of time or if anybody has questions. Feel free to just tell me, like, put out the cane.
Maybe what we should do is if people have questions, we just have like our 5-minute closing remarks, and then if people want to ask you questions, they can ask you directly. If you're okay to stay for another 20.
100%. You do your 5 minutes of closing, I'm gonna be over there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Can I say something before you close?
Yes, please.
I want to say thank you very much to all of the people with the liver.ca. It's unfortunate that we didn't have more of a show up, but I really appreciate that you've put this on today, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you so much. Heather, if you want to come back up, we just have a small token of our gratitude for you today. Thank you so much. Yeah, well, so Good time of year for it. Just to wrap up, again, thank you so much for everybody for coming today. We have a few closing remarks from some of our staff, and I will turn it over to Holly to come give her closing remarks. Thank you, everybody.
No problem. Hot mic.
That is a hot mic.
Yes, it is. No problem. Okay. I can't tell if, are your notes showing? Are the notes up? I thought I just.
Can I just like use that?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, so I won't be too long, but I just wanted to go through a few ways following Heather's presentation, just to share how you can get involved with the CLF if you are interested in having a greater role in the liver space, whether that's with media or getting your story out there and helping to progress the future of liver care here in Canada. Okay, so the first way is to share your story. So at the Canadian Liver Foundation, we're more than just an organization. We're a dedicated community striving to make a difference in the lives of those affected by liver disease. The voice of individuals with lived experience is at the center of everything that we do, and we really try to keep that in mind when we're developing programming, services, and events like today's event. Community stories show others that they are not alone in their journey. They provide hope, and they challenge us to realize a world without liver disease. So we invite you, if you're interested, to reach out to us if you'd like to share your story. We'd be happy to work with you if you are interested in going the media route, reaching out to a journalist, or a member of the media. We'd be happy to help you with that. And we also have different advocacy initiatives throughout the year. For example, our liver health education petition campaign that we had last year. And for campaigns like that, we'd be looking for individuals to share their story, to humanize the story, and to get their voice out there as well. You can also share your story at a fundraising event, at an educational event like today's session, or a webinar, and as part of one of our many digital awareness, advocacy, or fundraising campaigns. Another way that you can get involved is to volunteer with us. So our diverse range of volunteer opportunities means there's always a place for you. Some opportunities that we currently have include event coordination and execution, office administration, at the CLF National Office or at our local offices across the country. We do have a few out in the Western provinces. You can also lend your medical expertise or insights if you're a member of the medical community, or you could serve on our National Board of Directors if that's of interest to you. I encourage you to go to liver.ca to submit a volunteer application if volunteering with us is something that you're interested in. Another way that you can get involved with our community is to host your own event. Do-it-yourself fundraising is all about choosing an idea, an activity or hobby that's of interest to you, and then creating a fundraising component around it. After you've selected your activity, the next step is to reach out to your friends and family, neighbors, community to support it. If you're looking for inspiration, you can do something as simple as hosting a walkathon, a golf tournament, a bake sale. The list is really endless, and no idea is too big or small. If you're interested in DIY fundraising, you can go to liver.ca/DIY fundraising, or you can talk to Sarah if you're in the Ottawa community, as that's her region. And that's all I have, so thank you for listening.
So that officially wraps us up for the day. So I just want to thank everybody again for coming and for your time and attention and your questions. Such great questions today. I really appreciate everybody getting up and asking the questions about what's on their mind. To Holly's point, DIY fundraising is something that we are really finding a lot of activity about lately, and it's an inspiring way to share your story and also become a part of a community. We have somebody who wanted to be here today, actually, but instead she's throwing her own horseshoe throwing tournament, which is so cool. Anyways, and just to let you know, a couple of things coming up in the next month is we have a webinar with the University Health Network about living liver transplantation or organ transplantation. So you can find information about that on our website or Facebook page. And of course, we have our annual stroll for liver coming up on June 9th. And if you want more information about that, you can contact us or me directly. Anyways, I'll stop talking so you can talk amongst yourselves. Please stay and have more to eat if you want to. You don't have to rush out of the room by any means. And thank you again for coming today.